I'm going to talk about something that I'm going to be less technical, but I'm going to be more philosophical because I hope I can change your minds. Because caching does not solve your performance problems. It's a thing all right, who has ever built a WordPress site? Good people. How many have you, as one of the very last steps, added a caching plugin? Because we're supposed to do that. There's some hesitant people, they don't know if they did, but I think you did. Hi, my name is Remkus Vries. I'm a WordPress performance specialist and content creator. You can find me with the rest of what you see here. You can also check this, but I'm just going to go on to why does this mean that caching is not the same as performance? And there's a really big reason for this. I'll tell you the most important thing to remember right now is that caching, certainly if you do it at the end with a plugin or a solution, is essentially you hiding your performance problems. And what hiding means it can be unhidden. And that means there's a thing we call cache hit ratio, which means of the 100 people that visit your site, for sure, not 100 people will see a cached version of your site. And this depends on a lot of factors. And you can be the absolute best pro of understanding every single layer of caching inside of WordPress, outside of WordPress, and we'll get into those. But you will guaranteed not have 100% cache hit ratio. The thing you should take into account here is that your site has dynamic pages, it has search pages, it has 404s, it has, certainly when you're logged in, nothing is cached. Does everybody know that from the moment a cookie is set as you're visiting a WordPress site, that every single thing after that no longer is cached? Are we aware of that? So the cache hit ratio is depending on the type of site you have. And sure, you may have just a presentation site and there's like 15 pages and everything is hard cached and maybe the form is not. But you still have plenty of scenarios where your site is just not cached. And what I'd like you to understand is that certainly when the site gets a little bit more complex, so maybe your form does 2 steps, that already becomes a more difficult thing to say, this is always cached, this is always cached perfectly. So cache hit ratio is something that should be top of mind because we have a whole bunch of layers of caching inside our WordPress site. And the thing we're trying to solve is using all the layers we have to our availability. We don't want to think of performance as something you add at the end, just like you don't want to do that with accessibility, just like you don't want to do that with a great UX. These are things you do as you are building the site. And what was that? Oh, okay. So the layers of cache that we have to our availability are the most annoying one is this one, browser cache. I'm sure any one of you who has ever been in support has had say the question, could you try this in a new browser tab, maybe a private mode or even an entirely different browser? Because I'm not seeing the issue here. That's browser cache. There's a lot of stuff we can do to tell the browser to cache longer, but just understand that it is caching and it's annoying, but it's also great for repeat business. Page caching, also known as HTML caching. This is what we commonly refer to as just slap some caching on it and it will be fast. And you'll go, yeah, my Lighthouse is much better when I have caching turned on. Yes, again, cache hit ratio. And I'll explain a little bit more what the difference is there. Object caching is essentially it reduces the database load. It makes stuff smarter in queries and information it needs to pull in every single time. And we want to be smart when we're doing things on the web, don't we? Opcode cache, that's essentially the thing that optimizes everything that PHP does. So again, if PHP doesn't have to do the thing over and over again, that's a smart thing to choose for. And lastly, we have CDN caching. Out of all of these things, which one do you think is the one hurting you the most in terms of keeping your site performant? Page cache? Anyone? Browser cache? Opcode? CDN? It's all of them, but they shine through in page cache specifically. Page cache is, if you have a decent host, they will provide a native page caching. So an HTML version of your page done by the server. You don't need an external plugin to generate that. If you have a good host, they might have a good tight integration with one of the hosting performance plugins, and I'll touch on what those are a little bit later. But you're supposed to look at this as this is going to happen. So when caching fails you, that means there's a whole bunch of scenarios where you will see an uncached version of your site. So that means anybody coming in to your site via a tracking link, newsletters. Anybody familiar with your client having 30, 60,000 emails, newsletter subscribers, and then telling you, I don't know what's happening. Every single time I'm sending out an email, my site goes down. Ever heard of that one? It is because everything that's added at the end of the URL is treated as a cache buster. So that means if you are sending to 30,000 people, and even maybe just 3,000 people click on it in 1 hour, that whole hour will not a single person will see a cached version of the site. And that will bring your entire server down. That will look like WordPress can't handle this. So the problem isn't that WordPress can't handle it, but your stack of stuff that you use, the base performance you have built into your site, is just not up to par. You haven't considered all the scenarios. So there's slow queries, there's weird stuff going on your site. That means as you are visiting, it does a lot of admin AJAX requests. So it's constantly, as you're looking at your cache site, you're constantly still demanding server resources. So the understanding that caching is the help you thought it was is the first thing you need to change in your entire thinking about performance. So the problem we're trying to solve here is ultimately you want to build for speed. Now, I actually mean you want to build your site to be as fast as possible. And that's very simple to do. It may sound complicated, but it's complicated because most people do it at the end or in certain intervals. So let's say you're starting with a new site. You have your tools, you have your favorite themes, you have your favorite plugins, and you have perhaps your favorite page builder. And as you are adding that to the mix, your site gets more bloated. It's not bloated perhaps just yet, but it's adding to WordPress, and therefore it's adding to the runtime. Who has an idea of what the best indicator is to see what the impact of one thing added to WordPress is? Anyone? Not you, because you know this. The time to first byte. It's a very raw metric, and it says nothing more than the time the server takes for it to process your request, whichever URL that is, and then to start producing the output. Meaning, from the moment you request it to the moment it starts producing it, that time is called time to first byte. And it's essentially your WordPress site in all of its complexity thinking about the request. Meaning, it's loading the whole of WordPress, it's loading the whole of plugins, your themes, everything, and then combine that with what's happening on the page, and then starts generating it. So your time to first byte is the best thing you can use as you're building. You can do this in your local development just as you can do it with production live sites. But the whole principle here is that you measure every single thing you add. And you do that not once a day, certainly not once a week, but you do this every single time you add something of significant importance to your site. Now, this may sound cumbersome. This may sound annoying. Let me just code and add and configure and don't bother me with all these, I don't even understand what it is anyway. Well, here's the thing. You don't need to understand the thing. Let me repeat that. You don't need to understand the thing. You need to understand the impact, which means if you are adding a page builder because it's your favorite tool to work with in terms of how you create your content, do yourself a favor the next time. Look at your site as is. Check the time to first byte, just the time to first byte. Add your solution. Don't configure it yet. Just add the plugin, activate it, see what has changed. Some of the page builders will have an increase of 500 milliseconds just because they're added in a particular configuration. And I'm not saying all page builders are bad. I'm not saying they're all good, but I am saying they have an impact. And depending on what the goal is for the site that you are building, that impact may become a threshold you do not like. So adding stuff to your WordPress site should, as of today, stop being an automatic thing you're doing. If from now on, you should, as you're building, as you're adding, as you're updating a plugin, as you're adding your little piece of custom code, you should check, what is the impact of this? And that's not a difficult thing to do. And if you're like, I don't know how to do time to first byte testing, the simplest solution is going to your browser, you hit inspect and you go to Google Lighthouse and you let it run, and it'll tell you if the time to first byte is acceptable or not. The second thing is use Query Monitor, which is a plugin that allows you to get a lot of information of the queries that are running as you're processing your site. And New Relic, obviously, tools that run on the server are great for these types of things as well. I'm pointing to Harry because Harry talked about New Relic for those who entered later. But building for speed is the most important thing you can do. And the magic is in understanding what plugin has what effect on your time to first byte. And I keep hammering on the time to first byte because I want you to really understand the importance of the indication of the time to first byte. Because if that increases 200 milliseconds, 500 milliseconds, a second, and I've seen way worse, but let's assume that a second is already the worst you can have. That's sort of, it's not technically compounding, but it's making everything else worse that comes after it. It just waits. It just waits, and it keeps waiting, and it still keeps waiting. And then finally, it has the data to work with. But if that's taking a long time, all the rest is going to take more time as well. So the logic is that you learn to build for speed. And this is the thing you do the next time you build a site. You're just going to test the impact of the things you're adding. And you'll learn that sometimes this plugin does not work in this context because it's just adding too much resources. And in other cases, you'll go like, okay, I can live with this because the rest of the stuff I'm adding is not too bad. So all in all, I'm below 1 second of time to first byte. It's too much, but all right, I can live with this. But it might be that you see that adding this contact form plugin or that contact form plugin has an impact. And maybe you don't really have a preference in terms of which contact form because you like them both and whatever. But some cases you can, I've had cases where there were, and I'm not going to name and shame, but I've had cases where clients reach out to me and say, I don't understand why my contact forms and the whole thing that, and this is like 4 or 5 step stuff. I don't understand why it's so slow. I'm like, well, have you considered looking at a other plugin that does something similar first? And you may say, yeah, but I really like using that plugin because I know this plugin. I understand. But sometimes it's easier to just switch and check than to debug the whole thing. Like, why is this thing slow? It doesn't have to be complicated to build for performance, is what I'm trying to say. Some of you are highly technical and you go, let me just jump into WP CLI and do the whole, I have bash scripts running this and that, doing this, and using Query Monitor and having the extra modules. You have New Relic there. You do the whole thing and you like it, and that's great. But not everybody loves doing that. What everybody does love is understanding I have done something, there's an impact, and that's measurable. That's very straightforward, measurable. And then the thing is, you test while building. So this is not a once I've set it up type of thing. I have clients who are running in the millions of page views per month. Every single thing I change to that site needs to be verified before I push it to production. And that sounds cumbersome, but if you have that many page views, I guarantee you there's budget. I guarantee you there's budget. So you just need to sell yourself. Look, I'm not just updating a plugin and 5 minutes later it's in production. No, every single thing that I do, anywhere between 30 and 60 minutes is sometimes what it costs. Sounds expensive? Well, building for performance at that scale, am I doing that? No. Building for performance at that scale, it is time consuming, but it's the right thing to do because you want to understand what the impact of that update of whatever plugin it is. And while doing this, you'll discover certain plugins never have a negative impact. It's because the people building it understand this. They do it themselves with what they're doing. Playing with that is, at a certain point, you'll hit the, I get it now, because you have saved yourself from a headache. If there is a plugin that just increases time to first byte or something else weird starts happening, it's very easy for you to wait with that update, right? You can email and you can say, hey, I don't know if you know, but that next version of that plugin that you just released, it's slowed down my site tremendously. And they go, can you share me more? Yes, of course I can, because I did this update and this is my stack and this is what I have, and it added 300 milliseconds. I don't think that's supposed to happen, is it? No, it's not. Of course it's not. So this is the core of my philosophy. This is the core of what I want you to understand, that there is a better way of building sites that doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be you on the command line doing super incredibly difficult things to remember and whatnot. You can, again, if you like it, do it. But most of you are gonna be like, can I just have an easy version of this? So what I'm not covering right now is, if you want, you can script this. You all are aware there's this thing called AI now. You can ask it to say, this is what I want to do on a regular basis. I want to automate it if possible. I need a command line script in Bash that runs when I do something. And I want me to tell me that it's going to do this, this, and that, and then the output and the difference and all that. Sounds complicated, but you can just ask it to build it, and I guarantee you it's going to build you something really good. Because if AI is good at one language, it's Bash. It's very straightforward. It's a very simple language, and you could do very, very fun things with it. So when you're building sites like this, when you're building them smart, when you have your attention to all the things that you add, change, delete, and all that, then you might think, should you use caching plugins even? Well, yeah, of course you should. That remains a good choice. But to remind you, it doesn't solve your performance problems. So if you're running a WooCommerce site, your cache hit ratio, anybody have any idea, is it below 50% or under? Below? It's around 50. It's around 50. And depending on the type of traffic that you have, so sometimes that's a lot of search, and that's great. But most of the times, most stores run campaigns all the time. And your cache hit ratio goes down real fast because every single click is an uncached. Now, it's not as black and white. I just said that because there are ways of caching URL parameters, but your host needs to really understand this. And in my experience, not a lot do. There are ways to do some version of caching of whatever the tracking URL thing is. But you should use I forgot I had this slide, sorry. Absolutely, you should. What caching plugins also do is optimize your code. So that has in essence nothing to do with caching itself. It's whatever's being rendered is then being optimized. So this is something you'll always want to do, but you'll want to do it because you want to optimize the output, not speed up the output. Is that clear that we can make that distinction? You want to optimize the output. You don't want to optimize for performance. So also not as black and white as I just said it, but these are solutions I highly recommend. And the top three is my holy trinity. And I'll explain a little bit why. NitroPack, Cloudflare, and that includes Cloudflare APO, and Perf Matters. Perf Matters is a plugin that runs inside your WordPress site and allows you to optimize quite a few things. There's too many things to name them all here, but it's a plugin that is meant to optimize your output in the most leanest of ways. And what I like about this plugin specifically is that it has a script manager. And that script manager allows me to say, let's just say if you have, a great example again, the contact page usually means you have a contact form on your contact page and that's it. And you may not want to load all the scripts on the rest of the site, right? So the script manager of Perf Matters allows you to say, just load the scripts on this page because the rest doesn't make any sense. Why do I like NitroPack and Cloudflare APO above WP Rocket? Because they are caching at the edge. Have we heard of that term, the edge? I don't mean the U2 guitarist player, but people old enough to know what U2 is. Thank you. The edge means anything in front of your site. So if you go back to when I mentioned page caching is great, you need it. But in the most ideal version of page caching, the page cached is moved from your server to the edge, which means if that is set up correctly, your server doesn't have to do anything to serve up a static version of your page. And both NitroPack and Cloudflare do that, so I highly recommend you check those out. And if those are not an option, then WP Rocket does a good job. But you should always go for the optimum and the most optimized version of whatever you can do.